Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy lore breakdown. We are now on The Lightning Tower by Dan Abnett. Once more, we are delving into the past here, since this is the second Horus Heresy story released, again as kind of a teaser thing to really hype people up for the Horus Heresy. And this time, we get the other end of the little conversation that Kerr's, forced upon Dorn, it's probably the correct word to use, in the last short story. We get a look at Rogal Dorn, a peek behind the facade. I quite like the Lightning Tower because it humanizes Dorn a great deal, and Dorn is one of those Primarchs that we haven't had anywhere near enough of. Particularly in the case of the Lightning Tower, I really warmed to Dorn a huge amount through this story, because previously I was kind of just like, oh, he's just the Imperial Fists, you know. They're Ultra Smurfs, but yellow. No, he is way more of a human character than that. So, the entire thing basically revolves around Dorn's fortification of the Imperial Palace and how he views the upcoming conflict. It begins with Dorn talking to Ma Sing, the Master Mason, who is helping him fortify the Imperial Palace. Dorn is, of course, very good at the art of fortification, there is no doubt there, but this he does not view as a fortification. He does not view what he is doing to the Imperial Palace as a defensive measure, really, as, you know, digging in or entrenching. Instead, he views it as a flat-out desecration. He is taking the palace, as it is called, a massive continent-sized work of art, and he is tearing it down. He is ripping it apart and replacing it with ugly grey permacrete bastions, with gun batteries, with lasgun ports. He is tearing down walls that stand like monuments, like ginormous works of art, and he is replacing them with slab-faced, boring, drab creations of pure necessity. And certainly, it is necessary. It must be done. But Dorn does not take any pleasure in it, no enjoyment, no pride even, as he views it, again, as a desecration. Throughout the short story, he keeps thinking to himself, not a palace anymore. As if the very idea of the Imperial Palace, the monument, the grand achievement of unity has been destroyed by his hand rather than by the rebel War Master Horus's. I've already said so before, but I really do like this soft, squishy, marshmallowy Dorn. It really, genuinely, in my opinion, lends a great deal of depth to his character, and also makes him far more distinct from Perturabo, for example, which is often just, you know, the opposite. Oh, they're both siege masters, they're both fortification expert, and so on and so on. Yeah, the legions have a lot in common, but once you look beneath their exterior similarities, there is actually a vast ocean of difference between the two, in their thought patterns, their behavior, their ideals, etc., etc. Dorn's melancholy eventually also makes him consider another question. What is he afraid of? What does Dorn fear? For the first rule of defense is to know what you are defending against, so that you can figure out how to defeat the enemy's assault. I would honestly have preferred if they started out with a bit more of a technical term, honestly. If they'd started out like that instead, what do I need to defend again, and then slowly transition it over to fear, because the very idea of fear, the very usage of the term, is somewhat ill-fitting in this context, because Rogal Dorn as a creation doesn't really understand the concept of fear. It is something that he has himself literally never experienced, so it seems a little bit odd for him to start with that as the basis of his assumption, you know? But he moves on then to list his brothers and whether or not he might be afraid of them. Magnus? No. Fulgrim? No. Angron? Oh, he's a bit of a whingy puss, but no, he's not afraid of him either. Horus? No, he's not afraid of Horus. He respects Horus, just like he does Fulgrim or Perturabo or Mortarion or any of the others. He respects them, but he does not fear them. He understands they are threats, but they are not frightening to him. And so instead, he seizes upon the idea of Horus's betrayal. Why did Horus turn traitor? And Dorn realizes that he doesn't have an explanation. Not only does he not have an explanation, he can't even think of a reason, a rationale, a possibility that could explain why Horus has taken this seemingly absurd and beyond extreme course of action. He cannot understand it, and that makes him worried, because he fears that mayhaps if he could understand it, he'd find himself in agreement with it. And perhaps, then, he would go so far as to break all of his oaths as well. After all, Horus was made War Master because he was the foremost amongst them, the most equal amongst equals, and so on, and he was chosen by the Emperor himself. Surely such an individual could not simply just have turned his back on everything and decided to tear the galaxy asunder for no reason. He must have a rationale, and surely it must be a good one. And that, then, is Rogal Dorn's first fear, that Horus actually does have a good reason for what he is doing. And as he ponders this question, he is happened upon, entirely accidentally I'm sure, by Malcador the Sigillite, who informs Dorn that the Emperor has the utmost confidence in Dorn, and that he has no doubts whatsoever that Dorn will do anything and everything that is necessary, and that he trusts in his judgment as to what is and is not necessary completely. But he also informs Dorn that he suspects he may be unsure of himself, not wavering, but he may have questions, and Dorn admits that yes, he does. And Malcador wishes to provide some illumination. He starts using, interestingly enough, words like chaos. Now again, these are kind of prequel novels almost, and of course, in the actual novel series, the idea of chaos is barely understood at all, and whilst Rogal Dorn would probably have a general idea of what chaos would be, he certainly would not seize upon it immediately and be like, oh yes, it's the warp, which he does here. Instead, Malcador would probably have had to explain a great deal more, but Malcador's gist is essentially chaos is not rational. Chaos is not reasoning. Chaos is insanity and madness. And to understand it is to understand insanity, which would, by definition, essentially make you yourself insane as well. And in some cases, ignorance is bliss. Dorn does not need to torture himself about why the War Master turned, because if he knew, he would almost certainly be worse off than if he didn't. The Dorn that is today would be revolted by the Dorn that may have been created by such knowledge. He also then skillfully redirects Dorn's attention. He has at best given him a half explanation, and even that is probably overly generous, but then he brings forth a tarot card deck, the Minor Arcana once more. And then Malcador states that this particular deck of cards was created on Nostramo Quintus, even going so far as to implying that it was a deck utilized by Dorn's brother, Conrad Kurz, and that every night he laid out the card to divine the future, and every night he came up with the exact same results. Now this is something else. Dorn may not fear the military capacities of Horus or Magnus or Perturabo or any of his brothers, but he does fear Conrad Kurz, because he is the only one that has ever actually inflicted any damage on Dorn. When Dorn stormed into Conrad Kurz's chamber and began berating him after what he heard from Fulgrim, Kurz blacked out and ripped literal chunks out of Dorn's chest with his bare fingers. Yeah, I can see why that might be a fairly traumatic experience, I can't lie. I can definitely see why that might have gotten Dorn to be a little bit extra antsy around this particular brother, no doubt about that. But even so, the idea of fear, Malkador explains it away almost as if Kurz, I don't know, how do I word it? Almost as if there is a spell, like Kurz is scary, not merely because he's scary, but because he is fear incarnate, as if to suggest that there is some form of paranormal effect at work, essentially, which is why someone like Rogal Dorn, a Primarch who is immune to fear in any of his other forms, may still be afflicted by this fear. And, I mean, it does make a certain degree of sense. Some of the Primarchs do have essentially supernatural psychic powers. Korax, for example, can go literally invisible. That's, again, that is not an act of stealth. He literally disappears. So the idea that Kurz might have something similar surrounding the idea of fear, it's certainly not impossible, now is it? Whether or not that would work on a Primarch, well, again, Korak's little stunt does work, at least to a degree, on a Primarch. In fact, he used this on Conrad Kurz, and Kurz was like, that's not sneaking. Screw you. That's not stealth. That's invisibility. So clearly, it does have an effect. How much of one? Well, I guess that depends upon the Primarch in question. And in the case of Rogal Dorn and his trauma, well, it'd probably be reasonable to assume that he is affected more than most. Then Malkador proceeds to lay out the cards for Rogal Dorn to tell the future, again suggesting that this is possibly the Emperor's Tarot rather than merely just playing cards. But again, we know those were invented by Magnus later on, so it's... then again, yeah, prequel novels, blah blah blah, never mind. And the final card is the Lightning Tower. A tower being struck by lightning blowing out the bastion. At first, Dorn looks at that and goes, well, I mean, that's my castle going boom, isn't it? That's not a good thing, now is it? And Malkador's like, well, it's not an exact science, and it might also be misinterpreted. Yes, indeed. The card has many meanings, and I suppose that is the problem with tarot cards. Like, oh, well, if I selectively interpret this in a different way, then it means something completely different. But hey, fortune-telling, eh? Anywho, the card in Malkador's preferred interpretation in this particular moment is victory or some great achievement that comes at a considerable cost. An interpretation that Dorn himself also is relatively happy with. And, well, in the circumstances where the meaning is either death, destruction, and annihilation, or victory but at a cost, oh, you gotta pick the pragmatic choice, don't you? And so we arrive at Rogal Dorn's third fear. First, the fear of the unknown, the reasoning behind Horus Lupercal's actions. Then the fear of the monstrous, I suppose, the lethal, the deadly, the dangerous in the form of Conrad Kurz. And finally, 3, the fear of sacrifice and uncertainty. Because if the Lightning Tower truly does portend a great achievement, but at a cost, at a sacrifice, then what is the cost? What is the sacrifice? And is it a price that Dorn will be willing to pay? Because of course, also implicit in that interpretation is that it can only be a success if the sacrifice is made, if the price is met. What is Dorn willing to sacrifice? Is he willing to further demolish the Imperial Palace? How much time will he spend gently and carefully dismantling the artworks? Will he hold his punches when the enemy arrives? Will he hesitate to strike his brothers? Will fear overcome him in the face of Conrad Kurz? And so on and so on and so on. All these questions, all these doubts, all these fears will undoubtedly play out over and over and over again in Rogal Dorn's mind as he continues to prepare the defense of the Imperial Palace. And hey, it turns out this will actually be even shorter than the 19-minute one. Who'd have thunk it? But the next one on the list, the Kaban Project, that is a far more meaty proposition, so I'm sure that one will return to the more standard 30-40 minutes odd format. Until then, I've been Arch, thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.